Here's the second thing, and this goes back to the ranking member's comments about yesterday. To me, yesterday was an awful day in the history of this committee. It set new low after new low after new low. And I'm not going to talk about all of the new lows. I'm going to talk about one in particular. And that is whether anybody noticed the irony that the day before the United States Department of Justice arraigned a former FBI director for allegedly making untruthful statements to this committee, the Attorney General of the United States sat right there and made untruthful statements to this committee. And they weren't maybe untruthful statements. This wasn't a question of nuance. She made allegations about the ranking member and me having received political contributions from some, she said, Epstein close confidant. Well, guess what? That's actually checkable. There's a thing called the Federal Election Commission. The Federal Election Commission keeps a website that tracks all of our contributions. An intern at the Department of Justice could have checked to see that the allegation, I'll leave it to myself, that I had received campaign contributions from this individual, that was false. And it's not a maybe answer, it's a yes or no. Did I or didn't I? And there's an unimpeachable record that shows that what she said sitting right there was not true. If we are going to care about untruthful statements made by the Department of Justice and the FBI in this committee, let's not have this be yet another area where there are different rules for one party than for the other party. And just by the way, on that very subject, the other thing that the Attorney General did sitting right there was to strip all cover away from the untruthful statements that had been made to this committee by the current FBI director. You all heard him here. He said that he couldn't tell us about his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case, where he first pled the Fifth, then got immunity, and then testified. He couldn't tell us what he testified to, he said, because the Department of Justice had sealed the testimony and because there was a court order barring him from doing that. And he actually identified which judge, the chief judge of the D.C. Federal District Court. Well, guess what? We know that since then, the chief judge of the Federal District Court has said that that was not true. He said specifically nothing prevented Director Patel from discussing his grand jury testimony. And yesterday, the Attorney General had the chance to say, you're right. We did seal the testimony in that matter. The Department of Justice did seal the testimony, and Patel's statement was true. Not about the court order, but at least it was sealed by the Department of Justice. She didn't say that. So now both his testimony that the DOJ had sealed his testimony and his testimony that there was a court order barring his testimony are kind of demonstrably false statements to this committee. And then when he came back and we challenged him on those false statements, his second false statement was to say, I'm not going to answer any of those questions because my transcript of the grand jury testimony, I've worked with the DOJ to see that it is publicly released. Well, it either has been publicly released or it hasn't. It's a very simple distinction, yes or no. And we all know that it has not, in fact, been publicly released. And when we asked about that from the Attorney General, again, she left him high and dry and refused to say that anything had been publicly released, that there was any publicly released transcript. So yesterday stands in really stark contrast, I should say the day before yesterday stands in really stark contrast to yesterday. Yesterday, an FBI director was arraigned for making a false statement. The day before that, the Attorney General of the United States made arguably even falser statements. We'll see how the other case turns out. And she left the current FBI director completely exposed on his multiple false statements that his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case had been sealed by the department, was under court order not to be released, and had since been publicly released as a transcript. I don't know if this committee is going to take itself seriously enough to treat false statements to this committee as serious matters, irrespective of who made them. But the contrast is really stark. Thank you, Chairman.
What Senator Sheldon Whitehouse did in that moment was more than a simple Senate rebuke. It was a constitutional gut check, a moment where one of the few remaining institutionalists in Washington stood up and said, "Enough." This wasn't partisan theater. This was a senior senator reminding the nation that truth, the very foundation of justice and democracy, cannot survive selective enforcement. Whitehouse's outrage wasn't performative. It was rooted in something deeper. He's been on this committee long enough to recognize patterns, and what he witnessed from Attorney General Pam Bondi was, in his words, an awful day in the history of this committee. And when you unpack what he's describing, you realize he's right. Here's why. The Senate Judiciary Committee is supposed to be sacred ground, where facts are weighed, not fabricated, where truth is sought, not spun. It's where oversight over the Department of Justice, the institution charged with enforcing the law, is meant to happen without fear or favor. But what happened that day, according to Whitehouse, was the opposite. The nation's top law enforcement officer walked into that hearing room, raised her hand to tell the truth, and then knowingly made false statements on record about members of the very committee questioning her. Let that sink in. Not a random pundit, not a cable news commentator, but the Attorney General of the United States using her testimony to spread provable lies about sitting senators. And not minor misstatements. She accused Whitehouse and his Democratic colleague of taking campaign contributions from an Epstein associate, an accusation that would be devastating if true, but it wasn't. It was fabricated, baseless, and instantly disprovable through public FE records. And that's exactly Whitehouse's point. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Because anyone with internet access, even an intern at the DOJ, could have checked that claim and found it false. Yet it was said anyway, in a congressional hearing, under oath, to smear critics and score political points. Now, what's worse, the lie itself or the indifference to it? Because this didn't happen in a vacuum. Just a day earlier, a former FBI director was arraigned for lying to this same committee. That's what made Whitehouse's comments so cutting. The hypocrisy is almost unbearable. The same people who pound their chests about law and order, who rail about integrity in government, turned a blind eye when the lies came from their own. That's what he meant by new low after new low. When lying becomes normalized, when accountability depends on your political party, it's no longer justice. It's tribal warfare in suits and ties. Whitehouse wasn't just calling out Bondi, he was exposing a dangerous pattern, a Justice Department under political siege, bending to narratives instead of facts, prioritizing loyalty over law. He even went further, revealing that Bondi's testimony wasn't the only deception on display. The current FBI director, Kash Patel, had already given false statements about his sealed grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case. Patel claimed he couldn't discuss it because a court order barred him, but the chief judge of the D.C. District Court later confirmed that wasn't true. No such order existed. So ask yourself, if the nation's top law enforcement officials are willing to mislead Congress on camera, what does that say about what happens behind closed doors? Whitehouse is sounding an alarm that too few are willing to hear. He's warning that the danger isn't just corruption, it's normalization. When the Department of Justice starts protecting lies instead of exposing them, when congressional oversight becomes a stage for misinformation instead of accountability, we are inching towards something we've seen before in history, the slow unraveling of democratic institutions from within. And here's the larger takeaway most people will miss. This isn't just about one bad hearing. It's about what truth even means in the American system of justice. When facts are flexible and honesty depends on political convenience, we stop being governed by law and start being ruled by power. That's the world authoritarianism thrives in, where facts are subjective, lies are strategic, and truth becomes a partisan sport. Whitehouse understands that, and that's why his tone carried the weight of someone who's watched the fabric of accountability being ripped thread by thread. This moment is a reminder that democracy doesn't die with a bang. It dies with silence. It dies when the truth is sacrificed for tribal victory. It dies when we shrug and move on because that's just politics now. So when Whitehouse said yesterday was an awful day, he wasn't just talking about one hearing. He was talking about a moral crisis that's metastasizing in plain sight. And for everyone watching, This is the real question. If we can't demand honesty from the people sworn to uphold the law, then who exactly is the law protecting? This is why moments like this matter. Not for sound bites, not for outrage, but for accountability. Because democracy only survives when we, the people, refuse to look away. So if you believe truth still matters, if you believe in real oversight and integrity in government, make sure you're subscribed to Liberal Lens. Because these hearings aren't just procedural battles. They're the front lines of a larger struggle for the soul of American justice.